So we have today in the interview Don Hasse, former crew chief of the Ghost Riders 195th Assault Helicopter Company. Don served exclusively at CCS in supporting MACV-SOC on many missions, many bright lights.
Yeah, and Don gives such a cool perspective into the processes and the even the technical details of inserting and extracting SOG teams via helicopter, and that was so cool to get that perspective from him. And he's the first one of our veterans to actually play the game himself as well, and he's joined us on a few missions. And for somebody who hasn't played a video game before, he's doing a great job of it. He's really been awesome to have with us.
And a demon on the M60.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Laying it down.
He's been making us all laugh and just pouring out story after story, which has been a real privilege and pleasure for the team to spend time with this amazing veteran. Anyway, I think people listening in are going to have a sense of just what the aviators went through. The aviators who supported SOG. The SOG guys have always said, the aviators, they were their saviors. And these aviators are involved in Special Operations Association, and they have that invitation and involvement because of their support during the war.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's really cool in this interview to get that technical perspective from a crew chief who has such an expertise of combat helicopter and air assault operations, everything from insertion, extraction, and it's really cool to be able to see that. I think that it'll provide a unique perspective for people who play games like this that you might not get from other types of interviews with vets.
Yeah, we should also just as a last thing promote his YouTube channel where he hosts original 8mm film from Vietnam, which is some pretty amazing footage that you don't see anywhere else.
And we'll put a link for that in the description.
It's a great honor to host this rare interview with Don Hasse, who's been giving us some advice and encouragement to our team working on Armour 3 SOG Prairie Fire. And we have Sam with us as well. Say hi, Sam.
Hey, everybody.
And Sam's one of our amazing voice actors who voices the Ken Bowray and Jim Shorten in the campaign. And he's had the pleasure of interviewing both of those illustrious warriors in the past week, which you'll be able to see also on our channel. Now Don served tours in Vietnam. Was it multiple tours, Don?
Pardon me, Rob?
Was it multiple tours that you served?
Yeah, I served one tour,
right.
But I kind of, was set up to join the Army. I volunteered to join the Army and then volunteered to be wanted to be a Huey crew chief. So
you served a full tour in Vietnam?
Yes.
Okay, and we'll ask you about that in a moment, because we know that you also went and visited Cambodia and some other places.
Yes.
Okay, and you've been helping us looking at our missions and our screenshots as we've been going along, and giving us advice and commenting on the authenticity of our work, and for that we're very grateful.
You're welcome.
Right, and without further ado, let's dive in. So we're going to ask you tonight about your experiences over there. So I guess as a starting point, could you give us an overview of your time serving in Southeast Asia?
Well, I was formed up from our unit, the 195th Assault Helicopter Company, was built from scratch at Fort Carson, Colorado. And then we shipped everything to Vietnam in the fall of 1967. And we had some training, had to put the ships back together, and our official combat mission started December 1st. When I went over, I at first was part of the maintenance team, and I worked on a night unscheduled maintenance crew. In fact, I led the crew. And basically, when the helicopter went out on the day's flights and there were problems with it that either the pilot or crew chief noticed, they would write it up in the logbook. And then my job was to determine what their description of the problem meant, what parts that might need replaced or adjusted, and fix it. So I spent about 5 months doing that, and became very, very familiar with the helicopter. The whole time wanting to be a crew chief. I mean, that's what I joined the Army to do. And I kept asking them for my own ship, and they said, no, Don, we need you in the maintenance section. You're too valuable to us here. Well, as casualties happened and things happened, finally I was given my own ship, and I flew as a crew chief on it for about eight and a half months. And primarily the whole mission was supporting SOG. We did do some combat assaults in May Offensive, which was the secondary offensive after the Tet Offensive. And so did that for 8 months, and then was able to come home and spend my remaining few months in the Army and get out.
Well, thank you. I mean, what an amazing tour. So 8.5 months pretty much in combat.
Yes. Yeah, when I was in maintenance, I kept telling myself, I don't want to be over here and not know what's going out there in the outside world. I want to be able to at least, taste what it was like. And the first missions I had were combat assaults. And that was where we'd have 10 slicks going in, we'd have 4 gunships. And as we would come in and land, we'd have full suppression, which means the rockets are going off out the door of the ship, and the machine guns on all 20 machine guns on the 10 slicks were being fired, and we'd hit the ground and the troops would jump off, and then away we'd go again. And quite an eye-opening experience for somebody that's never seen combat before.
Yeah, I cannot imagine how loud that would be.
Yeah, loud and impressive, and way more than anything that Hollywood could ever produced at the time. I mean, it was pretty spectacular.
Have you ever seen anything that comes close to it in Hollywood?
The closest thing in Hollywood is We Were Soldiers Once and Young by Hal Moore and the 1st Air Cav in the Ia Valley. That captured the taste of it. And of course, another movie that I kind of enjoyed the latter part of it, even though it was kind of hokey, in the weirdness of it, was Apocalypse Now. And of course it was basically a SOG operator that was in Saigon, and his mission was to go into Cambodia and catch up with this renegade SOG major and his mountain yard people.
Yeah, I've heard other aviators comment on the Charlie's Point scene, where they're attacking the village and the reinforced village with the anti-aircraft guns, and they're coming in with Ride of the Valkyries, and I've heard some aviators say that's the closest thing they've ever seen to a combat assault, and I've heard other ones say it's hooey and they don't think it was anything like that.
Well, it was, without the music, it was a good scene. I mean, it represented it pretty well for the time, what the aviators saw. And, I think the going surfing and that was a little bit tongue in cheek, but,
Yeah.
The Vietnam veterans, especially the combat veterans, I mean, we did have a dark humor, and we did try to have fun, any place we could.
Yeah. So can I ask you about, so that you were in the 195th Assault Helicopter Company, and what were the call signs and what was the main role of the unit?
Okay, the company call sign was Sky Chief. The gun platoon was the Thunder Chickens, and they had the Thunder Chicken was their call sign, and my platoon, the second platoon, were the Ghost Riders, and then the first platoon was they had a Snoopy on, so they used Snoopy, but most of the time we used the Sky Chief or Thunder Chicken call signs, unless like the second platoon, we used the Ghost Rider call sign, and my platoon leader would be Ghost Rider 6, 6 being the commander, and then the pilot would be 1-6 or 2-6, depending on the first or second platoon. And then the Thunder Chickens had their own series of call signs. And everybody kept the same call sign pilot-wise as long as they were there, because it was it's how we could tell who was who and what was happening to who.
Brilliant. And what was the primary role of the 195th?
Well, our commanding founding father was a major, and he had spent time in the early 60s at Fort Bragg working with the Special Forces. And then he took a unit to Vietnam in 1965 and worked with the Special Forces there. And so he was assigned by the Department of Army to build the 195th. In fact, when he reported to Fort Carson and reported to General Williams, the commanding of the aviation section there, he was told that he was a maintenance service officer, and that a maintenance service officer wasn't going to lead a unit under his command in combat. And so he went with his tail back between his legs back to Fort Walters. And when he got back there, he told them what General Williams had said. And they said, well, it's not General Williams' decision. It's the Department of Army's decision. So you go back there and put the 195th together. So he went back and made a deal with the general. He said, if you're not happy with what I'm doing in 60 days, let me know and I'll request reassignment. And when we left, General Williams' last evaluation report of Major Carlson, our commanding officer, was that he had served in, been in, and commanded many aviation units over his career, and he had never seen one as prepared for combat as the 195th. So that was his last evaluation. Of course, then we went to Vietnam, and December 1st, when we were activated and allowed to fly combat missions, we started right off working with the Sigma and Omega SOG missions. Was prior to CCS and CCC and CCN, all of those, but we were primarily doing that mission. the 195th had 11 people killed during our time, or 2 years, 7 months serving in Vietnam. And all of those deaths were in support of SOG. We did support the infantry units, the 101st Airborne, 9th Infantry, the 25th and the 1st during the Tet Offensive and the May Offensive. But Colonel Drake was the commander of Sigma. He was real unhappy with some of the other units that had worked for him. And so in May, he demanded we come back and work for him. Because of our training and our tactics, we were just really a together unit. And it was, it was all because of our training. And so from May of 1968 on, we primarily flew the SOG mission in support of CCS.
So just as a sort of introduction, I mean, there's a picture behind you. I'm guessing your primary aircraft you would have flown on would be a D model Slick. Is that right?
Yeah, it was actually an H model, but it was the difference between the D and the H was the H model had 200 more horsepower in the engine, and that was the D model's engine didn't have enough horsepower to hover at altitude, and so it was pretty difficult for it to do a string or ladder operation. And so because our aircraft were capable of that, and this ship behind me is my helicopter. It's a Slick model, which was mounted with 2 machine guns, 2 M60s, one on each side, and was basically an insert extraction troop hauling ship. And the C models in our unit were the gunships, and they were a modification of the early B model Huey, which had a shorter compartment area, and the C model had a bigger engine and a wider rotor blade. And so it was designed to fly at slower speeds and carry more load, so it could carry the rockets and minigun ammunition or grenades for the 40 millimeter grenade launcher.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think our viewers will really appreciate now understanding the difference between them, because some people don't even notice that there are short cabin and long cabin helicopters. They think a Huey is a Huey.
Yeah, and it's it developed and grew over time. The first model was A model, and that was the short cabin, and the B and C models were just upgrades and improvements in the A model. And then when they went to the D model, that's where they expanded the cabin area, and the improvements went from there on up. And the 20th SOS had, I think, their M models, and they had twin engines and quite a bit more horsepower than we did.
Yeah, they were US Air Force, right?
Right. The
Green Hornets.
US Air Force's 20th Special Operations Squadron.
And they served in the same AO as you?
Yeah, they were at Bammy Tuet, and we were down at Long Binh. Bammy Tuet was the CCS headquarters, but Ho Nuc Tau is where the southern launch site in I want to say Project Sigma was located, and Bammy Tuet was where Project Omega was, B-50 and B-56. In July or so of '68, they combined the two, and that's when they made CCS, and it started.
Got it. Okay.
Anyway, yeah, Bamituit was quite a bit north of us, and so if we got up, we worked up there, then they were in that area, but they didn't get down to the Saigon area much because there was so much demand for the aviation assets that there was plenty for them to do in their own little home area. And the two areas were about 70, 80 miles apart.
Right. And so you had the sort of the mechanic background, which got you on a ship as a crew chief. How were you trained to be a door gunner as part of that?
Well, at mechanic school at Fort Eustis, Virginia, which they had an extensive maintenance school, it was a very good school. At the end of the course, they took us out on the helicopter and took us on a flight, and we went out over the Chesapeake Bay area and the marshlands around there, and we shot blanks out of the helicopter with this M60, and that was pretty much the training. I knew how to fire an M60. Now, the flight crews at Fort Carson, they got quite a bit more training than that. They were actually taken out to where they could fire live fire a couple of times, and the pilots and the gunners on the gunships fired rockets and the miniguns and all of that. So, but when I became a crew chief, I started flying that first day, and I had no training beyond shooting the blanks at Fort Eustis. So I knew how to lock and load, and my gunner showed me how to feed it again, refresh me, so I got that part. And the first combat assault we did, we were supposed to shoot the houses and what we call the hooches and haystacks. And I started shooting and shooting in the door of this house, and this chicken come running out. And so I started chasing him all over the place, trying to shoot that communist chicken. And it was kind of you learn by trial and error. And as soon as you saw a few tracers flying at you, we got real focused, real intense, and the training went real fast.
Wow. So you learned on the job.
I did. Now, many of our gunners were infantry prior to coming to our unit, and they may have been M60 gunners in their infantry unit and had quite a bit of experience with the M60 and the armory and
What did an aircraft crew look like? Could you take us through each of the roles of each person on a crew?
So the Huey Air Crew had two pilots and a crew chief, door gunner, and a door gunner. And the pilot was the one in the left seat was the aircraft commander. The one in the right seat was what we call the Peter pilot, and he was basically a pilot in training. He hadn't had enough experience in flight training, on the job training, to actually be an aircraft commander. So they had the platoon split up into pilots that were aircraft commanders, and they were always assigned a junior pilot that was the co-pilot. And then the crew chief was responsible for all of the maintenance on the ship and all the mechanical functions of the ship. And then he fired the left door gun, and the crew chief sat on the left side of the helicopter. The gunner was just primarily responsible for the machine guns, and he sat on the right side of the aircraft. And I was really lucky. A lot of gunners helped their crew chief, and I was really lucky to have an exceptional gunner in that he always stayed and was my assistant doing my crew chief duties, and then I would help him clean the guns, and we worked together as a team. And I mean, during the combat assault missions where we'd fly 12, 14, 15, 16 hours, every 25 hours, the helicopter had to have a 25-hour inspection. And that was where you checked all of the fuel filters, you pulled out all the chip detector plugs and checked the engine oil and transmission oil for particles, metal particles in it, which would collect on the magnetic chip on the chip detector. And so every third or fourth day, we'd get up in the morning at 4 a.m, fly all day, come back, shut down, and then we'd do our maintenance. And every third day, we'd have that 25-hour. And that would take probably till sometimes 11, 12 o'clock at night to complete. And then we'd go to bed and get up the next morning and do it all over again. And so it was, most of that time was get up at 4 a.m, get to bed at midnight. I did that for a year.
My God, that's pretty. That's a pretty intense schedule there.
Yes, it is. It's but when you're at war, it's a serious, intense business, and not all units did it the way I did, or the way the 195th did. But we, like I say, our training was superb, and we worked really, really hard to keep everything flying.
Did your crew, was it permanently assigned to that aircraft?
Yeah, the pilots could change around, but about 2 months after I became a crew chief, I started getting the hang of it. And as you can see, I kept my ship pretty clean, and it was well maintained because I knew it so well from my time in maintenance that I was able to keep it. And so my platoon leader, Captain Neal, took notice of that. And every time he flew, he pulled rank and he flew my ship. So if he was flying, we stayed together. The gunner and crew chief stayed together on the ship. But the pilots could change around, but they did try and keep them together as much as they could, as far as the aircraft commander and the Peter pilot, the co-pilot.
I'm sure you built pretty big attachment through that.
Yes. Yeah. When I found my platoon leader while I had been dug out of the woodwork by a buddy of mine, and we were going to I was going to Fort Bragg for SOG's presidential unit citation presentation. And I found that Gene Neal, Captain Neal, was living in Charlotte. So I went and spent a week with him. And as soon as I saw him, it was like we hadn't missed a day. I mean, it was just, I'm closer, or was closer to him. He's passed away now, but I was closer to him than my own brothers. And I'm pretty close to my brothers, and so it was, a tremendous bond. Another story, we had a mission in bad weather, and we may get into that later. But my Captain Neal received a Distinguished Flying Cross, and the last thing he did before he deroasted and went home was he handed me that medal and said, "Don, here, I want to give this to you, and
Wow.
you know, you deserve it more than I do. I was just flying, you know." And of course, that's one of my most cherished possessions.
Oh, absolutely. Wow. That's really cool.
But that'll give you a little bit of you know, flavor of, you know, the bond that was created between a crew chief and a gunner and the pilots. And
Yeah, no
you know,
kidding. Did you ever get any stick time yourself? A chance to do that?
yeah, I had about 25 hours of stick time. Of course, the thinking was that if the pilot and co-pilot were hit and the aircraft was still flyable, they wanted me to be able and to take it off and fly it back and get it, you know, get them out of harm's way. So I had about 25 hours of stick time. I could fly it through the air pretty good, take off. Landing, we might end up in a crumpled heap, because that was pretty difficult. But you know, I felt confident after a while that, you know, if they did both get hit, and I had to pull one of them out of the seat and fly back myself, I could do that. And there are instances where crew chiefs in the Vietnam War did do that. You know, we did actually bring the aircraft back.
So when you got the stick time, was that kind of on, did you prioritize missions kind of like Ash and Trash for that, or did you
Yeah, I
do?
would be on the Ash and Trash mission. You know, we might, you know, be flying an officer around, visit his troops, or, you know, go to meetings. And so they, you know, and of course the pilot, he always wanted to get back on the gun because they didn't get to shoot unless they pulled out their 38 or pulled 1911 and shot out the window, but which some of them did sometimes. But
Wow.
yeah, so I'd be the Ash and Trash missions where we'd fly and you know, take off, and then we'd get up to altitude and they'd say, okay, you know, get us on this heading and take us on this heading and keep us at this altitude. You know,
That's awesome.
got your time, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about life back on base? What was that like?
Well, I, you know, told you our schedule, you know, working, we were, you know, up every morning. So basically it was the helicopter first. And then once the helicopter was, everything was done to it to make it flyable and flight ready the next day. And, you know, that would, every bolt you took off had to be safety wired back on. The safety wire had to be inspected by a tech inspector. And then most of the parts changes had to be then flown and tested by our test pilot or maintenance pilot, and then he'd sign off on it. And then once that was all done, the aircraft was ready to go the next day. Then it was go up to the company area and join the platoon buddies. And we had a little squad tent that we'd turned into a club. In fact, I was able when I was in maintenance, I was assigned driver to a deuce and a half. And I learned how to acquire Jeeps by going out to the junkyard and taking an ID plate off of a Jeep the Army had written off the books, and then going down to the Long Bin post where they had a lot full of Jeeps that were being recycled to be rebuilt. They might have 60, 70,000 miles, and they were rebuilding them. So I'd pick a nice shiny one you could tell a general there's some high-grade officer had been on. It was pretty well treated. So I'd wait for lunchtime or bribe the people there at the lot and drive the Jeep up on the deuce and a half, take it back and take the ID plate off and put the ID plate on that was written off the books. And then we had a Jeep, and we could trade them, or we had extra Jeeps that we used for transportation because there wasn't enough to get to and from the flight line. And so anyway, I was able to trade one of those Jeeps for a pallet of beer, 144 cases of beer. Whoa. And that started our club. And, it ran into the whole time we were there.
That's the starter package.
Yeah, the starter package. Exactly. It was our seed money or seed inventory.
Did you ever take any contact at base at all?
Yes. During the Tet Offensive, we were assaulted. I was working in maintenance then, and I got off my shift at 11:30, and the mess hall was open. So at midnight, I went in and got my breakfast. That's when I ate breakfast. And then I went to bed, and about 2 a.m, mortar rounds started impacting the airbase and Long Binh Post. So I rolled out in the ditch, and we were in the ditch, and one of the officers came and said, "I need 6 volunteers." And he goes, you, and a volunteer come with me. And so they put us on the M60 machine guns on the perimeter, and we had these little C-shaped 3 or 4 sandbag high gun emplacements that we were supposed to defend our perimeter in. And at that time, our perimeter just went into the jungle. We had no barbed wire, no anything. I mean, you could walk out in the jungle or back. There was no perimeter at all. And so about an hour and a half later, I noticed about 200-300 yards in front of me, this gunship flying along. And all of a sudden, he turned his searchlight on and then started shooting his miniguns. And then I saw a burst of red tracers go up in front of him. And it dawned on me, though, that was VC that were shooting at him. And then all hell broke loose. They had taken over the village. It's called the Widows Village, and it's where the widows and orphans lived. And it was off post, but the VC had taken over it, and they assaulted us out of it. And it was just, I found later in reading, 11th Armored Cav went up there and foiled their attempt to overrun us. And then to the north of us, there were about 400 VC that were going to sweep through our area. And one of our gun teams was coming back at 3 a.m. from Song Bay, and they spotted these guys out in the open and just had a turkey shoot. It was not a fair fight. But those people that were right in front of me, about 100 yards, they went on up, and they were they were led by our Vietnamese barber that cut our hair, and he was leading sappers to attack the pilot billets and pilot air. And luckily, one of the guys one of the pilots in our sister unit had previous Army and Special Forces training, and he ran to the perimeter and in a flare lit, and he spotted them and killed 9 of them before they could do their dastardly deed. And so we were pretty much pinned down for 2-3 days. We had airstrikes on our perimeter, which I have movies of, and snipers. And we couldn't get up on the aircraft in the maintenance area because snipers would shoot at us. And so we were probed on the perimeter for a couple of days after that. And it took them a while for the infantry, the 199th Light Infantry Brigade, to clear them all out.
Wow, that's really incredible. And you said the barber was leading the sapper team?
Yeah, we had a Vietnamese barber, local Vietnamese guy that was hired. And, if you're going to gather information, intelligence, what better place to do it than a barber chair?
Mm-hmm.
And
No
I remember prior to that, that was January 31st, we got in country about the 1st of October. And so I had a few haircuts by him. And he would always, after the haircut, then he'd give us a shave with a straight razor. And I remember him shaving on my neck thinking, man, if this guy's a bad guy, I wouldn't have a prayer. And then come find out he was, really was a bad guy, and I never had prayer. So I never let the barber after that get anywhere near me with a straight razor. He could use his scissors and his clippers, but, no straight razor.
God, I'm sure that goes through your head every time you're getting your hair cut following that. My Lord.
Well, it did. It not so much anymore, but when I first got out of the Army, when the barbers were still using straight razors, I'd just say, well, I'd just soon have you not use that on me.
Yeah.
Because, it went through my head.
Yeah. God. So during times like that, how do you keep your morale up? I mean, like when you're under attack during tough times like that, or even just running missions in general?
It's just pretty much, there's a place you go inside you, and you do what needs to be done. And, some people, things slow down. And it's, not everybody can do it. You find that nobody knows how they'll react in combat unless, until they're there. We've had people that were big muscle bound guys, just excelled through all the training, the military training and everything. And the first time they're shot at, they're on the ground in a fetal position, almost bawling. And, the little guy that you never expected would, come out of a shell, he's the guy that receives the Medal of Honor, and so, you just learn to deal with that, and you get a dark humor. Combat veterans have especially when they get together, they have this dark humor that they use. And then the rest of it is just, partying and being with your guys. But the maintenance and the pace of the job, especially for flight crews and infantry units and that, pretty much your job keeps you focused on what you're doing. And, and then we had the club, you go drink and do your job. And, when you're off, you were drinking, partying with your buddies. And then, of course, there was the trips downtown. You could take leave and go into town, and, they had restaurants and, different things you could do in town, bars in town and that. So you just, kind of what young guys do on college, only there's guns instead of books.
And during the I can't imagine going out with the buddies, right after doing something like you guys are doing out there. That's just crazy. But I mean, yeah, it always intrigues me hearing about
I
how people
have
do it.
I have a buddy of mine who was a gunship crew chief, and his one of his real good friends. He became good friends with one of the recon team members, and they, in fact, so they went out, and the recon team leader, they went in and decided to sneak off base at night. And because the SOG member, of course, had the ID card that, said, don't mess with this guy no matter what he's doing. He's on a classified mission. So they were in this whorehouse, and the buddy of mine did his thing, and the SOG Retong guy was taking his turn, and my buddy noticed this pistol come in around, had a curtain for a door, and he saw this pistol, so he reached over, picked up his AK-47, and it was a squad of VC that were coming in, going to catch him and kill him, and he ended up killing two of them. And it just you're in a war zone, so that stuff can happen anytime, anywhere, and you have to carry it with you.
Yeah, I mean, Jim Shorten was talking about, just like a cafe that they were near where there were a bunch of VC and even Chinese guys there. It's just, I can't imagine being in that close of proximity. You gotta, I guess, keep your guard up.
Well, yeah, and I was downtown before the Tet Offensive, and I saw these young guys, young Vietnamese guys, walking, outside this cafe I was at, and I looked over them, and I've never seen so much hatred in a person's eyes in my life, and they all had it, and they all had short haircuts, and after Tet, it dawned on me that those were enemy soldiers, and they were unarmed, they were in civilian clothes, and but they had lost enough buddies that they wanted to do me in, but were not able to because of their mission. And then, of course, a few days later, the Tet Offensive happened, and so yeah, you could see them, and Vung Tau, which was over on the coast east of Saigon, was an R&R center, and there was a depot maintenance there, and the Sea Wolves, the Navy helicopter unit that supported some of the SEALs down in the Delta, was there, and but it was a NBA R&R center and an American R&R center. So you'd be in a bar, and it was real common to see soldiers on the other side, and just everybody just minded their P's and Q's, and it's kind of a weird thing about war. It's insanely brutal at one point, but it's insanely insane at the other extreme of it.
Yeah, that's incredible. So can I ask you maybe to just run us through one of your combat missions on the aircraft?
So the combat mission was after we started working for recon teams, we'd put recon teams in, and they would go out and find targets. And then they had the hatchet forces, which was platoon and company size CIDG that were led by a couple of American Green Berets, and then the locals. And so we would insert those missions in combat assaults. And Colonel Drake was a really gung-ho, combat tested in Korea, West Point officer. And he had us doing hatchet force combat assaults at night. And we'd do like 5-ship insertions. And when you do an insertion, you'd have a gun team on both sides of you, 2 gunships on either side. And the tactic of the gunship was to, as soon as one gunship pulled out of a gun run, then the other gunship would be turning in to be able to provide fire underneath and protect the exposed belly of the helicopter as it was coming out. And so they would rotate in a circle. So you'd have that going on both sides of you. And then we'd fly along at night and totally darked out over the jungle. You know, you couldn't see anything but just the stars and your night perception. We had no night vision. I mean, at that stage, the starlight scope was in its infancy. And so the pilots would fly down right above the treetop level, and we'd be vectored by a FAC plane, bird dog. And as soon as we'd get above the treetops on short final, then the pilot would flip the searchlight on so he could see to land in the LZ. And lots of times these were, base camps and things that the recon teams had found. And so we'd go in with full suppression. And at nighttime, you'd be going in and machine guns blazing away, tracers flying through the trees, rockets exploding on both sides of you. And sometimes if the enemy was there and close and chose to, you'd have green tracers coming back at you. And, you'd be trying to extinguish them. And then the troops would get out and you'd take off and flip the light off and it'd be all dark again. Away they'd go. And that was one type mission that was, pretty insane. Another insertion, this was a hatchet team during the daytime. And we were flying along and the LZ had been prepped by artillery. And, when we do an insertion, they'd put 30 or 40 artillery rounds in front of us. And then the idea was as soon as that last round hit, we wanted to swoop in on the ground, let the troops out. Well, we were coming in and we were 10, 15 feet off the ground. And the Peter pilot was flying and he said, we're losing rotor RPM. We're losing power. And so the Gene Neal, my platoon leader, said, has he unload the aircraft? So I had to go start pitching the poor Cambodian guys off. They're looking at me knowing that's a long ways to jump. And so I got all of them off. The first one I had to push. It started getting empty. And I looked over in the right-hand door, there was this Special Forces second lieutenant. And he was standing there looking at me like, what the hell? And I unplugged my mic cord and took a step for him. He decided that, we'd jump out. Well, Captain Neal was able to keep the aircraft in the air, nurse it, and we flew it back. And so I went into maintenance and they, it wouldn't hold the hover at altitude. And so they cleaned the engine out with some walnut shells, which is what we use to clean the carbon out. And then they adjusted the fuel control on it and they wrote it off. And so me and the maintenance pilot went up and did a hover check on it, and it'd hover at 200 feet in the air. It'd start bleeding on up RPM, so I red X it again, which grounds the aircraft. They'd work on it again, and they went through this, and this went on for about 10 days. And you know, if it wouldn't hold a hover, and my attitude was, if I've got to go, you know, throw a ladder out, and we're hovering in the jungle, and you know, these guys come up on the ladder, and we're losing RPM, you know, that's a no-go situation. And so what I didn't learn until just a few years ago, when Colonel Lindsay wrote his book, basically I wrote it off and grounded it. They finally sent it over to Vung Tau to depot maintenance, and they did determine, yeah, I needed a new engine. They put a new engine in it, and the problem was solved. And the only reason I got away with that was because I'd spent so much time in maintenance, and I kept going to the maintenance sergeant and the tech inspector and the maintenance pilot saying, you know, this ain't good. We're not doing this. And, you know, they allowed me to do that. Probably a lesser crew chief, they would have taken the ship away from me. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, I found out that at that point, we hadn't lost an engine yet in the country. And this was like in June, July. And they were trying to keep their maintenance record perfect. And so that's why they kept trying to keep us flying. But at that point, you know, all of the pilots wanted to fly with me then, because they knew that if I would go to that extreme to keep the aircraft flyable, you know, something happened to them, it wasn't going to be because of a mistake that I made.
Yeah.
So those are the Hatches Force missions. And then there's, of course, the recon teams. And, you know, you'd insert them. Sometimes you would have 3 LZs, and only they knew which one you were going to, they were going to get off in. And so you'd go into one LZ and come back out, and they'd still be there. You go into another LZ and come back out. And of course, every LZ you go into, you're subject to ground fire, because the enemy can be waiting for you. And then, you know, maybe the third one, they jump off and you come out. And then you come back and you'd sit on strip standby, waiting for a team to either be compromised and spotted, and you'd go extract them, or compromised and being chased, and you needed to go extract them. And sometimes under Colonel Drake, where we have to go extract them at night, which was another hairy situation, going into a small LZ at night, and then being there waiting, and sometimes the enemy being between you and the team, and red and green tracers are flying back and forth, and you're shooting at the green tracers or where they're coming from, and then the team may fight their way through, and you get on and away you go. You know, which was another type of mission that you'd have to deal with. Pretty intense.
Yeah, I think in our game we've added a little searchlight on the bottom of the M60s. I bet you'd have loved one of those, or would you? You know, would it make you more of a target?
It was probably more of a target. Yeah, it would have been more of a. The tracers were enough of a target, you know, but they were so beneficial in telling you where you were firing, and you know, shooting out of an aircraft is just totally different than shooting on the ground. And I suppose what I know about the game, it probably compensates for that, and is in the game, it's difficult to shoot out of the aircraft also, as it would be for a flight crew. You pretty much just learn to start firing and then move the tracers where you need the gun to be. And after thousands and thousands of rounds, you become very effective at it.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. So yeah, I mean, we just use the searchlight so we can see and scan the ground and the tree line, and you know, of course, you might have had flares for that. Would there have been in 40mm flares?
The flares weren't used. They were pretty much used in perimeter defense, you know, for the troops on the ground. But the flares in the aircraft were, you know, a flight hazard if they were dropping flares on your LZ where you were going into. So it's, you know, it's pretty much just the pilots had to use their night vision, and you know, I've had the opportunity to look through present day night vision equipment from some friends of mine that are ex-operators, and it's just incredible how good the night vision is. We had the infrared scopes, and during the Tet Offensive I was telling you about, on our perimeter, why it had a Jeep and it had a infrared searchlight on it, and you'd look through the binoculars and out where the searchlight, and everything was green, like the early Army night vision goggles are. But yeah, totally different than what we have. We had none of that kind of equipment, and it's just a real testament to how incredibly brave and talented our pilots were to, you know, not kill people, putting people in and extracting them at night in a jungle. I know one of our pilots told a story at our memorial dedication when he flying over the triple canopy jungle, and he was going to insert a recon team, and the aircraft commander told him, he said, okay, just your job is to look at the instruments and you know, keep the airspeed and all the instruments, and you scan those and don't look at anything else, just the instrument, and keep calling them off to me, while the crew chief and gunner guided the pilot down into this little teeny hole in the jungle to drop the recon team off or pick it up. And he said, I looked up through the ceiling at the canopy and I was horrified. He said, I could see no blue sky. It was all green. And I had no idea that, you know, the pilot could fly using the directions as a crew chief and the gunner to get us down in this little teeny hole. And then we flew back out of it in triple canopy jungle.
And I guess, I mean, they wouldn't have been trained to do that. That's just something they flew by the seat of their pants. They had experience. Yeah,
it was just, and you know, it was just something like, I might have a different co-pilot, but you know, Gene and I and Ed, my gunner, you know, we were just, I mean, it got to the point, one of the hairiest missions we ever would do would be, we'd get to a point to where the ladder or the rope wouldn't reach the ground, and we had foliage, and Gene trusted Ed and I enough to trim a few leaves and branches, you know, because we knew how smaller ones that would just do damage to the rotor blade and not take a chunk out of the rotor. And so we'd actually trim some leaves, getting down to get low enough to get the team in and out for the instructions on either the string or the rope ladder.
That's outstanding. And What did you? So you told us about flying at night. How about in bad weather?
Yeah, we had one situation that was an extremely bad weather monsoon condition, and we had a six-man recon team that was in trouble in one location, about to be overrun, and we had a platoon-sized hatchet force in another location that was about to be overrun. And it was basically what pilots call 0-0 minimums. I mean, the monsoon rainstorm was so bad, there was hardly no visibility. And we were able to get in and extract the six-man team, which Gene and I did that mission, extraction. And then the other pilots in the platoon extracted the hatchet force, and our gun platoon had landed on the ground, flew through the weather, found where we were supposed to take these guys back to, and he activated his FM radio, and so we could home in on his FM radio transmission, and we were able to fly in and just absolutely extreme. I mean, you were in what the pilot calls IFR conditions, and they were able to fly it anyway. And just, the result of that mission, why the gunship platoon leader that flew us in received the Silver Star, and 7 of the pilots received Distinguished Flying Crosses that day, which is the one that Gene gave me that I told you about earlier. So we, could fly. And if that mission had been up north where they had more hills and mountains, it wouldn't have been possible. Probably both of those elements would have been overrun.
What personal equipment did you bring with you, and personal equipment and weapons? And then what did your crew bring with too? What types of things would you find on an aircraft?
Okay, and I was going to say, when we going to Vietnam, we were government property, and we only had government property, a few sets of civilian clothes, and some personal items. But we had the M60 machine gun, and the M60, you'll see, had a 750 round ammo box on it with a chute that fed it. And we ended up not liking those and taking them off, because if a weapon jammed in the chute, it took too long to clear it. So we'd basically just clamp a C ration can, usually a Hammond lima beans meal, on the machine gun that fit, and we'd run the ammo over that. And then we'd carry 2,000 rounds in a grenade box, and all linked together in one belt. And then I carried M16 rifle, and I had about 500 rounds already loaded in magazines. And at the time we had 20 round magazines. So those magazines were duct taped together. So you had basically 18 rounds in each 20 round magazine for 36 rounds. And if you got in a situation where the M60 jammed, you were not able to clear it quickly, then you could grab the M16 and continue to fire out the door and suppress with it, which I did do on several occasions. And then the pilots carried usually a 38 special pistol, basically a 6-gun. And you'll see a lot of times they would have it on a belt around their waist, and they'd put it between their crotch. and they'd use the weapon to protect their private parts. The helicopter seat, pilot seat, was armored, but your arms and leg and head, everything stuck outside of it. And then sometimes later on, some of the crews would find things and be able to trade with the special forces guys and get AK-47s and that kind of thing to carry along. Right at the first part that I started flying, we were also able to carry hand grenades, but they had some accidents, and so they took those away from the flight crews. Case of guys dropping them on board, and, taking a few of their own aircraft out, and so they quit that. So, and then we'd have a flak jacket. Usually, we'd wear the flak jacket, which was just designed to protect you from flak. And then there was the chicken plate, which is the chest protector. We called it a chicken plate. And basically it was a honeycomb web material about a 1/2 inch thick. And it was filled with a ceramic material. And then it went inside a canvas pouch, and you could wear it on the chest, and it would come down and around to your kidneys. Down south, in the CCS area, we put those underneath our seat because most of the ground fire would come up from the down below, and so we would just use the flak vest for, flak and that mortar rounds in the LZ and that, and then the chest protector underneath. And then, of course, the pilots wore them. There was, and then later, about halfway through '68, they came up with the ballistic helmet. And I never had one, but that was a flight helmet that had ballistic capabilities. We do have one pilot that took a round in his helmet, and the round went around the inside of his helmet and out the other side of it. And he and the crew that he was flying with at the time was convinced he was shot in the head and going to die any minute, until they landed and found out what had actually happened, because he felt it. And he was sure he was hit in the head, but the ballistic helmet protected him, saved his life, and of course he still has that helmet.
That's quite something to take back with you, I bet. Helmet like that, my God.
Yeah, and you think if that happened to you, and I know there's quite a few air crews that their chest protector protected them, and they still have those souvenirs.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you said, what kind of helmet did you have specifically?
It was just the basic non-ballistic flight helmet. You see, it's depicted on the pilots in your game, and it had headphones in it and a microphone. And back in the crew chief and the gunner well up on the ceiling was a series of switches, and we could switch on and off both the intercom and all of the radios on board. And the helicopter carried AM, FM, UHF, VHF, and then we had the KY-28, which was a scrambled radio that both the sender on the ground and the helicopter had to have the same code entered into it to be able to receive and transmit to each other. And so we could transmit or just listen, or completely turn off all of the radios and the intercom. But it was set up so if both pilots were hit, we could transmit out over guard, and guard was the frequency that everybody listened to. Nobody talked on it unless it was an emergency, and that was the frequency that the prairie fire emergencies would go out, or if aircraft were hit, the Mayday call would go out over, or you'd have a FAC might transmit over guard that they had some wounded on the ground at such and such coordinates. Is there any aircraft that could come get them? And lots of times if we were close to that area, then we'd transmit over guard that, yeah, you got so-and-so in the area, and, you know, we'll take that mission. And I had a couple of pilots that wouldn't fly with me because if I was flying anywhere and there was a Thunder Chicken gun team with me, I'd been in and out of so many hot LZs, and I had such confidence in the gun teams that I'd volunteer to go, pick the wounded guy up off the battlefield when the medevacs would refuse to go in. Their unit policy would not allow them to go in the hot LZ. And I'd say, if you can get the fire suppressed, we'll come in and get them. And so I would go in on many occasions and get wounded troops. And my thinking was, is if I was laying there and was shot on the battlefield and needed to get to the hospital, I'd want somebody to do everything they could to come and get me. And the medevacs were incredibly brave and just did incredibly brave things, but they did have operating policies that if the LZ was too hot, that they wouldn't be able to go in. And so in that case, lots of times we would go in and get them.
Don, did you have to get out of the aircraft to go and get people into it, or were they just loaded on when you landed?
Well, my favorite was they had medics and their ground guys could load them on. But yeah, there were times that we did have to get out of the aircraft and, go assist wounded, or in one situation, we had a Cobra that was shot down south of Saigon, and we went, and the pilot or the gunner was dead, and the pilot in the back seat was traumatized, and I had to go and actually help him out of the helicopter. And when I got there, he was sitting there, had his Colt 1911 like this, just shaking like a leaf, and he couldn't even open the canopy. I mean, he'd released it, but he didn't slide it open, and so I had to probably help him out of the aircraft and get him back to save his life. And that was probably the hairiest thing. I was lucky enough not to ever be in a situation where I was shot down and pinned down on the ground. The time that we were shot down, which, I'll cover that now, is when you were shot down, the job as the crew chief and gunner was to, get the pilot and co-pilot off the aircraft and then take the machine guns and set up a perimeter until you could come in and be extracted. And, so that was what you would do. You'd take the guns, you would, take maybe a couple hundred rounds of ammunition, belted, and then you would set up a perimeter and till the ship could come in. And the time that I went down, I was barely off the ground. Both the pilot and co-pilot were able to get out of the aircraft, and the ship was landed with us. We were coming on the way out of inserting a hatchet force, and when we got hit. And so that was the extent of it. But one of my buddies was a gun platoon crew chief, and he was on his orientation flight with a sister company, and he got shot down twice the first day he flew in Vietnam. And he was thinking, come back, oh man, this is going to be a long war. We're all going to die.
That's a heck of an introduction, isn't it, to combat? Is get shot down twice on the first day.
Yeah, and you know what you're made of when and what he was made of, in that he went back. There was another aircraft, and he got back on it and went back out and did it again. And then that aircraft was shot down. Then he came back and, got us on his own ship, and he extended for 5 months. So he spent a year and a half as a crew chief on a gunship, getting on his ship every day.
That takes some guts, because he already knows what it's like to be shot down, and then he's extending as well. What a brave guy.
Yeah, and he's to this day a very, very dear friend of mine. I mean, we went through helicopter training school together, and then to Fort Carson to form the unit, and then in Vietnam, and now we go to I see him every year at the Special Operations Association reunion, and good friend of mine.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So given what you were saying about being shot down, how did the H model generally hold up in combat? Could it take quite a few rounds?
It was just unbelievable. Sometimes it would take, like the time that I was shot down, my ship was shot down, it was hit 28 times, and the round that brought it down hit the fuel control, and so the engine lost fuel, and so it came down. But I took a body retraction, like a bright light team, to recover bodies, and that was of an air crew, and they were flying low level, and one round went through the pilot's head, and he fell over on the stick, and because they were low leveling, the whole crew was killed. And then we had ships that have taken 100 rounds and still flown back and made it back, and landed. It just, one of those things about war, there's no telling. And just, we had a saying, when your number's up, your number's up. And, we'd see ships get all shot up and nobody wounded, or, minor wounds, or we'd see one round and everybody's dead.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen photos of on the Facebook page for the various, for aviators from NAM, and sometimes it beggars belief the number of holes you see in a helicopter. All the glass is blown out, the chin bubble's gone, the practically bits hanging off. It's like a Swiss cheese. But it made it back.
Exactly, and the pilot and sometimes the pilot and co-pilot would be wounded. Sometimes they'd be wounded so bad that the crew chief would have to fly it back. But yeah, they'd make it back and land. And then other times they'd be down on the ground. Crew would have to be picked up, and then they'd have to send a Chinook in to sling load it out and bring it back. And the maintenance crew could put it all back together again and send it off to do it again.
And in terms of the sort of the capability of the aircraft, how frequently would you have to refuel or rearm each day?
The helicopter had 2 fuel cells on it, and they would go about 4 hours. And I think that was about 400 gallons of fuel, if I remember right. So about 100 gallons an hour is what the helicopter would burn. And then, so you had to refuel every 3.5 hours or so, because you didn't want to cut it right down to the limit. But sometimes, especially the gunships did. And then armament was, usually every time we refueled, we topped the ammunition off, because the POL and armament points were the same place. Where you got gas, there'd also be a Connex container full of ammunition and rockets and the different ammunition we needed. So every time we refueled, we'd top off the ammunition.
I think I remember in the Chicken Hawk book them talking about you would carry like a jerry can of water for everyone so you could drink during the day.
Yeah, we had a 5-gallon water cooler, and it was, basically something that would be taken out of the mess hall. It was stainless steel, and you could fill it with water, and you put ice in it, and so you had ice water. Had a little spigot on the bottom, and you'd carry that. Unless you were doing, combat assault missions where you were loading up with troops, and usually then you just have your canteen, and you take your canteen full of water, and that would be all you had for water. But we had one ash and trash mission. We were flying re-support for the 101st Airborne Division, and their infantry units were spread out north of Benoit, and we were taking them hot lunch. And so we'd go in and land at the mess hall, and the mess sergeant would send out all these Mermac containers full of, hot lunch, ham and scalloped potatoes and whatever they were eating. And first thing he did was he brought out 4 ice cold Budweisers, one for each crew member. And so we'd fly about 20 minutes, go out there and, drop the food off, come back, and he'd be out there. And first guy out had 4 ice cold Budweiser. Well, after about 4 sorties, we noticed that the pilots were becoming impaired. And so we told him we had enough beer. We didn't need any more beer. And he kept coming out with Budweiser. And Budweiser was a favorite beer and hard to come by in Vietnam. And so we ended up at the end of the day, our water cooler was out of water and ice, but it was full of ice cold beer cans, full beer cans. So we took them back for a little party that night. But, we had to cut the pilot and co-pilot off. They were, getting a little woozy in their landings and takeoffs.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's great that they're rewarding you. They're giving you a nice beer for you helping out their guys.
One of the only times. Oh, sorry.
It was really, appreciated, and you could tell they really appreciated us. But he's kind of pushing it to the limit. But it told us that, and I'm sure that's what the mess sergeant was doing, was making sure that he was feeding his boys, and we were helping them get a hot meal out there.
So what types of insertion and extraction drills did you practice for your missions, Don?
Well, the most of the training the pilots got was after they were in country. I mean, in the stateside, they practiced, out in the north part or south part of Fort Carson, and they would practice troop insertions and extraction. But once we got into country and became operational, all of the training, if we had a new crew member, why they would be put on, if it was a gunner, he would be put on a helicopter with an experienced crew chief. And if it was a new pilot, then he was usually put with, lots of times it was my platoon leader, Gene Neal. He was one of the company instructor pilots. And so the new pilot would fly with the company instructor pilot, and they got on-the-job training. We would also train the pilots on use of the ladders and the McGuire rig, stable rig, string extractions. And so we'd go out over a secure area, and lots of times the crew chiefs and gunners, and in fact, I got to do this several times, would hook into the McGuire rig, and then the pilots would lift us off the ground and fly us around and bring us back. And quite frankly, I enjoyed it. I thought it was just, one of the most fun things you could ever do. It was, I was well accustomed to flying. I was totally at ease with it. So hanging underneath the helicopter on a rope and, not having any of the noise, just the air noise and everything, was just an exhilarating ride, and I was a 19-year-old kid. So, there's no carnival ride like it. But when you're being shot at, that adds a whole new dimension that the special forces guys get to have, and I'm quite happy to leave them with that.
Sure.
So we would train that way, but most of the once we were in operation, our training was actual on-the-job training. The crews that did the combat assaults or the SOG insertion extraction missions, had at least, if it was a new crew member, and even the SOG missions, the co-pilots did a lot of ash and trash and other missions before they got to fly on that mission. So it was even the first time the co-pilot flew a SOG mission, he had experience at that mission. And of course, in the beginning, early 1968 on through, we just, it was on-the-job training. And, the rope ladders were not utilized. When we first started using them, Norm Doney hadn't invented the cable and aluminum rod ladder that you see and use and is on some of our ships. We first started, they were actual rope ladders with 2 strands of rope with rungs tied between them. And of course, if anybody's ever been on a rope ladder, they're extremely difficult to climb. Mm-hmm. And, but that's what we started with. And that's what the early SOG guys used for extractions. And then once the cable rope, then we had a McGuire rig, which was basically a rope with a swing seat on it. And you'd sit in the swing seat, and it had a strap that come around your waist. And, if you didn't stay upright, hang on and stay upright, you fell over, you fell out of it. And then it was a little bit later in 1968, early 69, the Stabo rig was invented that was part of your combat harness, and you could actually snap into it. So it was all of the stuff like that was on the job training. We, we trained and learned about it in combat situations.
So talking about your LZs, did you always call them LZs? Did you ever call them PZs or anything like that?
We always used the term LZ. PZ was a pickup name, but we even, we called the pickup zone LZ. I mean, we all knew what if we were going to pick them up or let them out. I mean, it was pretty obvious, and it was just habit we got into. But I'm sure there were lots of other units that, did differentiate.
According to SOP.
LZ and PZ.
Okay. What went into the decision-making process for picking an LZ? Was it kind of determined mainly by your air crews, or was that something, how did you coordinate with ground elements?
Actually, the LZ would be, if there were a mission, then the CNC ship, which at the first part of it, I flew a lot of CNC missions with Colonel Drake because of the maintenance and the cleanliness of my aircraft. Him being a colonel officer, the unit wanted to give him our best aircraft. And so so we'd go out with the recon team leader, the 1-0, and fly over the area, and the aircraft commander and him would pick, the LZ or maybe a primary and secondary LZ. And then they would go back and find it on the map, locate it on the map, and do the orientation before we went. And then, of course, the forward air controller was, part of that operation and radio communication. So he knew what the LZ was. And so then when the team would get inserted, we'd use 4 aircraft, and you'd have the insertion aircraft and a chase aircraft. And the chase aircraft was to come in and pick up the insertion aircraft if it was shot down. And so you would be circling at altitude quite a ways away from the LZ that the recon team was going to use. And then you would peel off of that, and the ship that was doing the insertion then would, usually in our area, we go right down on the deck, and then the forward air controller would vector us to the landing zone, because usually sometimes there were no bigger than an area in the woods that was one aircraft could land in. And we'd come in and land, they'd jump out, and we'd be, get back out of there, and then join back up with the formation and go back. And then we also had usually at least 1 gun team with us, sometimes 2 gun teams with us, and they would cover the insertion and extraction, and pick us up. And then, of course, if we received fire, and tremendously good, we'd have smoke grenades wired to the seat stanchion, and we'd wire the ring to the stanchion. So all we had to do was reach up, grab a hold of the bottom of the smoke grenade canister, pull it and throw it out. And as we pulled it and threw it, the pin came out, the spoon flipped off. And many times our gunship pilots were so good, we'd throw a smoke canister out and rockets would be hitting on the ground below us before the smoke canister reached the ground. Wow. And, then, once we made the insertion, then we go back to formation, and we'd go back and land and be on strip standby and waiting to get scrambled to pick up the team. And they might put, there'd be four aircraft, and so all four aircraft would be on strip standby, and there might be 2 or 3 teams out that those 4 aircraft were covering. And then if one got in trouble, then you'd go get it and pull them out.
Okay. Did recon teams, were they all on that one aircraft, or did any hang out on the chase aircraft for a second insertion, or did you just all go in? Sorry, or
Yeah,
did you all just go in for that one?
The recon team were mostly 2 special forces, Americans, and 4 indigenous people. And so they were all on one aircraft. The H model Hueys that we had would carry 6 Americans or 7 or 8 Vietnamese because they were so much smaller than we were. And get a little drink there. They were smaller, so we could carry more of them. And so they were all on the insertion aircraft. If during the insertion, and the chase medic was usually not on the insertion aircraft due to weight, that would just add an extra American to the weight, and you were hovering down in triple canopy jungle like a mosquito, to get to the ground. You didn't want that extra weight. So the chase medic would be on one of the other slicks and orbiting at altitude. If he had to go in, then they'd peel out and he would go into the LZ.
How did that work for hatchet forces then? Did you have multiple aircraft land at once, or how did that work?
Yeah, what I was explaining prior to this with the 4 aircraft circling away is a recon team insertion extraction. For a hatchet force, they could be anywhere from 3 ships, which would be maybe 18 guys, to 10 ships, which could be 60, which could be a reinforced platoon size. And sometimes we might do several lifts. One occasion, we Project Delta recon team discovered a real large arms cache, and so their hatchet forces, we inserted them to overrun the arms cache and take control of it. And so we inserted, we made like 3 different 10 ships insertions to insert all of those people in. And it was like 60 people in insert. So basically in that case, we'd have 4 gunships, and the LZ would be picked out already. The CNC and the FAC would know where the LZ was, and they would vector us into the LZ. And of course, we'd drop them off and come back, pick another load up and go back out and take them back in and then insert them back into the LZ. And depending on the size of force we were inserting, that could be, like I said, anywhere from 3 ships, going in and inserting a smaller unit, to as many as 10 ships and several insertions. And the first guys would go in, control the LZ, then the other 2 lifts would come in. Then once they got to their full strength, then they would line up and go assault the target. And that arms cache contained 547,000 AK-47 rounds, a couple thousand 82 millimeter mortar rounds, 2 or 3,000 blocks of Chinese C4 explosives and two basically hooch warehouse buildings full of rice, and something like 6 or 10 Chinook loads of ammunition was captured there on that mission. And
Wow.
which, just is staggering how much ammunition that the North Vietnamese were sending out of Hanoi and down over Vu Gia Pass and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail to our area north of Saigon on the Cambodian border.
So when you came in for Hatching Force insertion, then what did the LZ look like? What was kind of the size usually that was ideal for something like that? I'm sure it depended, but
it depended on the number of ships that we were inserting. We'd always pick the smallest LZ we could, in that the less open terrain around you, the better, because the more open terrain around you, the more that you can be seen and targeted by the enemy. We had big grassland areas that were, hundreds of acres. And so, we tried to avoid those. And if we did use an LZ that size, it would be on a 10-ship insertion. And we'd try to pick a protected area real close to the tree line. And that way artillery and gunships could cover the other side of the clearing. So it was possible for the NVA to, they could effectively target us from a mile away with a 50 caliber or 51 caliber machine gun. And so we tried to pick the smallest LZ, the smallest hole in the jungle that we could get all the aircraft into that we needed. And
did all your troop ships land at once? Or I know you had chase ships for the recon teams, but
yeah, on the Hatchet Force insertions, they were pretty much like a combat assault. And so no matter how many ever ships it was, I mean, if it was full suppression, so we were going into where we had the guns blazing. I used to comment, it was like we'd blast our way in and blast our way out, because typically that's what you do. These LZs, there might be a base camp real close, so you could have enemy in the tree line on the LZ. And so lots of times they would artillery prep that LZ and maybe put 30, 40, 50 artillery rounds around the LZ area that we're going into. And then we'd come in, and as soon as that last artillery round would hit the ground, we'd try to be no more than a quarter mile or a couple hundred yards behind it and land, let the troops offload, and then get out of there. And coming in, our gunships would be exploding 10 or 17-pound rockets or flechettes, whatever they had on our perimeter. And the door gunner and crew chief would be shooting the M60s, suppressing the fire. And then as soon as we hit the ground, we'd stop shooting, let the people jump off the helicopter, and then we'd take off. And lots of times we'd come in and, the skids may not hit the ground. They might be 6 inches off the ground or a foot or two off the ground. Mm-hmm. And, the Hatchet Force troops would jump out and go assault the tree lines, and we'd take off. And so, it may be no more than just like a touch and go. You just come in, flare, zero out the airspeed, and you're doing this in a hole in the trees. So it's for ship. The first guy in, the assault leader, we'd call a chalk leader, he would have to land in a place where the other helicopters behind him had to have room, and everybody had to get in at the same time and then get out at the same time. And, on a couple occasions, we had one occasion where 3 ships went in to do an insertion. It was a hot LZ, and one of the back pilots got excited receiving fire, and he started coming out too soon and clipped the tail rotor of the aircraft in front of him, and all 3 of them went down in the LZ, and had to be sling loaded out.
Wow, that's amazing to hear how that works. I cannot imagine how the amount of adrenaline that must go through you while you're doing something like that.
Yeah, and it's the adrenaline is once you've been in combat, it's hard to get rid of when you come back, because you learn to like it, and you learn to live on it. And that's why, so many combat veterans come back and, go into fireman work or police work, and all of them like to drive Harley Davidson motorcycles or drive fast cars. And, it's just, you're so alive at that moment that it's really hard to experience and learn to live without once you get back. And but it's something that every combat veteran has experience with. I know we have an annual camping trip with the Special Forces chapter here in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, where I'm from. And every year we go over and camp, and we had a new guy that had spent 30 years in the military and was a member of Delta Force. And we're sitting around the campfire, and quite a few Vietnam veterans, and he was one of 2 combat veterans post 9/11 there. And it was amazing. As soon as he realized there were combat veterans there, at first his stories, he kind of tentative, like he's walking on eggshells. And after 3 or 4 cocktails and sitting around the campfire and, hearing stories from Vietnam and being able to tell his stories, I mean, he opened up like a gushing fountain, and, just had some incredible stories. And, it's a bonding that we have that, most protected or normal people, as we call them, don't have. But it's there whether you're, 25 years old and a veteran, or 85 years old and a combat veteran.
Well, as we were talking about combat, what sort of things would the NVA fire at you? Have you been shot at by B-40 rockets or 50 cals?
Well, they love to mortar and rocket us. Anytime we had to go fuel and rearm, we were susceptible to being mortar attacked. And I think because we flew around in these camouflage, unmarked helicopters. I mean, the Ghost Rider emblem on the nose, you see, is real subdued. And we had no tail markings, no U.S. Army, no markings. We were no dog tags, no markings on our fatigues, name tags, anything like that. So we were very sterile as far as our markings. I kind of lost track of where we were at.
Yeah, well, I was just asking about being shot at, because I remember we spoke before, and you were talking about when you see tracer coming up at you like a big green basketball.
Correct. right, I got off on subdued being shot at. We're mortared at, and then we were shot at with machine guns, AK-47s, the RPD, the Chinese machine gun. We were shot at with 51 caliber machine guns, and the most dastardly hated weapon of all of them that we were shot at was the RPG, and it just, hate that weapon. I still don't like it, and you can see why. It would just totally ruin a helicopter, and as they found out in Mogadishu and Black Hawk Down, the RPG is, and it's very simple, it's very deadly, and very effective.
Yeah, I guess that's a good reason not to hover.
Yes, it's a good reason to keep moving. And and yet, you'd be in the trees and you'd have to hover, and you'd have to throw 150 foot rope out and then wait for the recon team to get to it, get snapped into it, and then you had to hover up to altitude until that last guy on the string cleared the trees, and then you would take off and go into transitional lift and gain altitude and haul them away. It was extremely vulnerable time for a helicopter.
I guess at that time, that's during a typical prairie fire emergency type scenario. So you'd have aircraft buzzing in all over the place, dropping all kinds of ordnance as well.
Yes. Primarily, they would keep us free of the area. They would, like the jets would come in and make strafing runs, and then they would pull them off to a rendezvous point and then bring us in to do the extraction. But the gunships were operating at the same time, and we would operate on extractions of prairie fire extraction in a situation to where we'd go in with our gunships operating. But anytime the fast movers were involved, usually we were pulled away at a rendezvous area, circling at altitude, and they were doing the same. And then the forward air controllers, the guy up there controlling this whole mess, and he would bring the fast movers in to get the ordnance on target. And he was the one that knew where the recon team or hatchet team was on the ground and had them located. And so it was extremely, but it was a situation that you always had to be involved of the aircraft, and you also you had to be involved of where the B-52 strikes were going. They would announce those on guard right before they would happen, and they'd have all the aircraft clear that area. You would have to fly clear of an artillery fan, which is where artillery is firing into an LZ. It's possible when you're flying in a helicopter and they fire a 175 round, you can actually see the round flying through the air, going on target and hitting. So, you have to avoid all of that stuff while you're at the same time getting in there yourself to make the extraction and get the team out of there. And I know the command and control ship would be at altitude circling, and that would usually have the the SOG launch commander on it. Its job was to just circle at altitude. In fact, Colonel Drake, who was the Sigma commander, and up until July of '68, when Colonel Trabu came on and CCS was formed, he had the CNC ship mounted with a 50 caliber machine gun. And the reason is that he wanted the M60 wouldn't reach the ground from 5,000 feet in the air where he operated. And so he wanted to be able to feel like he could get into the battle. And it had a practical point also, because being a CNC, he knew where everything was, and he could have the crew chief fire around on the ground. And maybe if there was a new FAC on site, then he could put rounds on the ground, trace around with the 50 caliber and mark targets. Then the FAC could take over and get the gunships and the fast movers or the A-10s in on or the A-1Es in on the target.
That's fantastic. I often wonder what the 50 cal was on the side of a Huey, because I've seen it a few times. It's quite a rare thing.
But and that's primary. That's the CNC ship. And I have kind of a humorous story now. Colonel Drake, like I say, was always, I flew him all the time. He liked my aircraft, and he had this bad habit. He was about 6'2" and about 260 pounds. And we'd go and we'd pick him up at Honak Tau, and we'd go to the SOG headquarters at 2nd Field Force Saigon, and we'd go in and we'd come in and we'd just be at a hover, and he'd jump out on the skid, jump off the helicopter and go running in to see his bosses. Well, every time the pilot and co-pilot are up front, they can't see when he's jumping. And so as soon as 250, 60 pounds leave, all of a sudden they sway over to the other side. And, we almost had rotor strikes a couple of times. And we'd talk to him, they'd ask him not to do it. And he'd come in, and, I didn't find out and figure it out until I grew up with later is that he was being gung-ho because he was reporting to the generals over it. And, that he was being gung-ho and being a good soldier for him, jumping off and running in there real quick. Well, anyway, I one time got just sick and tired of it. He just kept doing it. And the crew chief is God of the ship. I mean, whatever the crew chief says goes. The aircraft commander is the commander of the ship. But if the crew chief says, "Sir, I don't think we should fly this mission because of such and such," the aircraft commander is going to listen to the crew chief. So being God of the ship, he gets out on the skid to jump off, and I just reached out and grabbed him on the shoulder on his epaulette and wouldn't let him jump off until we landed. And of course, he immediately turned around, jumped to attention, and just read me the riot act, and then turned around and ran off. Well, I went back and he turned me in for an Article 15. And so the commanding officer, the 195th, called me in. I explained to him the situation, and he said, okay, you were right, but, in the future, you should, have the aircraft commander talk to him. And I go, well, sir, we did. And, he was ignoring it. And before he killed himself and the whole crew, I figured I'd get his attention. So anyway, I didn't get the Article 15. Commanding officer said, Colonel Drake, Specialist Hassey was right. You were endangering the crew, and, he should have talked to you and not done that. And so, we're not going to have him fly your mission anymore. We'll get you somebody else to fly your mission. And I was just ecstatic because I didn't want to fly CNC. I wanted to do insertions and extractions. And Captain Neal, my platoon leader, was ecstatic because he was doing insertions and extractions, and he wanted to fly my aircraft. So from that time on, I flew insertions and extractions. And right after that, Colonel Drake had the crew chief of the helicopter that replaced me put a 50 caliber on the side of it so he could get into battle. And you know, I held animosity to Colonel Drake for a while for trying to turn me in for saving our lives. But as I've grown, matured, and understand military order a little more, he was doing his job, and I probably should have used a different approach on him.
That's a great story. Thank you. So I think we talked before. Have you been back to Vietnam?
Yes, I went back in 2006. Gene Neal, my platoon leader, when he was 55, had clogged arteries and had a triple bypass and needed another bypass and was in surgery and evidently died of a stroke in surgery. And he and his family were real good friends with a guy that developed and built the Osprey Pack Company, and they were manufactured in Vietnam. So when Gene's youngest boy, Justin, graduated from high school, he went to Saigon to visit his buddy who was living there with his mom and dad, supervising their pack factory being constructed. And so he invited me to come over and show him where his dad and I, where we'd served and everything. So I went back to Vietnam and spent a month there with him and his brother, touring Vietnam and the places that we had been, and got to go up on Nui Ba Dien and go back out to the launch site at Dao Tiang and kind of get around in the area of operation when I went back. And I tell people, and I'd heard this before from other vets who had been back, it's the best thing you can do. You learn to leave a lot of demons there that, you don't have to carry anymore. And there was up at Tay Ninh, just north of Dao Tiang, south of the Cambodian border, about 15 kilometers, there's a mountain that's called Black Virgin Mountain, pronounced Nui Ba Dien in Vietnamese. And it was a radio relay site. And we would have had a radio relay station on top of it. And we owned the top and a lot of the ground around the bottom sometimes. But the Viet Cong owned the caves and the sides of the mountain. It was a sacred mountain to the Vietnamese, so we weren't allowed to put airstrikes or anything onto the mountainside. And so when I went back, why Justin and Travis and they have halfway up the side of it, there was a Buddhist monastery, and the Vietnamese have made a theme park around the bottom of it, and they have a cable ride, tramway ride up to the Buddhist monastery. And so the three of us went back and we're walking from the parking lot around to buy a ticket to this tramway, and out there walking by myself, and we were in the off time, so there's no cars in the parking lot. And I'm going, the last time I was here, if an American, three Americans walking like this around this, even if we were armed, we'd be subjected to being sniped at or fired at. And here we are, three unarmed Americans walking around, getting ready to go on a tramway ride up to the top of it. And so that was kind of a eye-opening experience for me, in that I realized I could finally say, the war's over, the Vietnamese people are okay, I'm okay. They hold no animosity towards us. I was constantly approached, by young 35, 40-year-old Vietnamese people that, whose parents may have been on either side. If they were communists and they were, really doing well in society, if they were on the South Vietnamese side, they had to work a little harder at it, but they held no animosity, and they wanted to know what I did. The communist soldiers were polite, and they'd talk to you. And I spotted a couple of veterans. I was on the banks of the Saigon River in Saigon, and I call it Saigon. The communists changed the name to Ho Chi Minh City, but they're the only people, the communist government, even the local Vietnamese people still call it Saigon, because it's been that name for thousands of years, and it's still Saigon. So I was down on the Saigon River. I had a camera I bought to take over with me, and I was practicing with it, had the user manual, and I was taking pictures and learning about it. It had a telephoto lens on it, and I noticed, down the river about 200-300 yards from me, there were these three guys on a parking bench. So I took their picture, and when I zoomed in and looked at it, I could see they all had military haircuts and were all in shape and everything. And so I said, well, these guys are veterans. And so sure enough, I got down there, and they were NVA veterans, and they were, sitting on the riverbank, kind of chatting with each other. And I didn't speak very much Vietnamese. They spoke very little English, but we had that bond. We could tell they knew I was a veteran. They were a veteran. And, we had that camaraderie that, one time we were enemies, but now we're just human beings living the same experiences, and glad to have survived and live with our families and enjoy our families. And, it was really a good experience for me to experience those three gentlemen.
What an incredible story, Don. A tale of warriors, I guess. That you have forgiveness in the heart, that you can all stand together and share that time and not have any hatred.
Yeah, and it, Rob, I think it goes across the generations. I watched a YouTube video of a Holocaust survivor, and she had a one-on-one meeting with one of her guards. And these two ladies are in their 90s, and they, found each other because of the internet, and they decided, I'll go ahead and meet this lady. They remembered each other, but they were, really intrepid about their meeting. And when they brought them in and brought them together and they sat down, they had no animosity towards each other. They had a shared experience from a long, long time ago. And they spent about 3 hours there just talking to each other like they were old lost buddies. But, at the time when they were in their youth, they hated each other. So I think, that's it is kind of amazing how warriors, once the battles are over and passed on to history, all of those are forgotten. And I know many. I've got a friend who his brother was in the Air Force and was shot down, and he went back and met the pilot that shot him down. And of course, ABC did a news story about their reunion, and there was a book written about it. But they were able to go, and now they're lifelong buddies. And at one time, that these two young aviator pilots, on one day got in combat with each other, and one of them prevailed over the other one, and they both survived to live and tell about it. And,
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Don, when was the last time you went on a helicopter?
Last time I was on a helicopter was May 18th, 2018. And we dedicated a monument at Fort Rucker, Alabama, to the 195th Assault Helicopter killed in action. And they have a memorial park at the Aviation Museum on Fort Rucker. And of course, Fort Rucker is home to the 1st Aviation Brigade. And they hosted it well. Right off of Fort Rucker is Friends of Army Aviation, and they rebuild Army aircraft. They have a rebuilt Bird Dog, and they rebuild helicopters and get them flyable, and they offer rides to veterans. So we were able to, the 195th veterans go over and on an afternoon and go on Huey rides. And it was exhilarating. And I had my young grandson with me, and his name's Ryan. And Ryan was in a work accident and lost 3 of his fingers. And so he had been medevac to a hospital. He lives in Oklahoma City. And so he was going on the Huey ride with me. And he was a little terrified about the whole experience, because of his trauma. And I was just excited. So we got on and we're sitting there, and I said, Ryan, as long as you see this ear-to-ear grin on my face, don't worry. You have nothing to worry about. If it goes away, then don't jump unless I do. And he said, okay, so he did. And as the Huey started up and the rotor blade started spinning, they're out of balance, and it bounces a little bit. He got this terrified look on his face. I give him a thumbs up and patted him on the shoulder and told him he'd be okay. And he's sitting in the gunner's well with me. And then we take off and we fly and come back and land. And he gets off and he's just grinning from ear to ear, gives a thumbs up. And one of our sisters of one of our aviators, a crew chief that was killed in action, she gets off with her grandkids and she goes, wow, now I know what my brother loved about this job and why flying was so important to him. It was so incredible to experience that ride. And, once I got on the helicopter and once that turbine started and the blade started spinning, I was a 19-year-old kid again. It was just exhilarating to get to go take a 10, 15-minute flight around the Alabama countryside.
Excellent. Yeah, I bet that was great fun. I wanted to. You were telling me before we started that you've bought Arma 3, and you've just started getting into it. And I think I'd said before, I'm really keen to have you join us in the game, and we'll take you for a fly in a Thunder Chicken, and maybe you can pickle off some rockets.
I would absolutely love to do that. Like I say, I bought the game. I've been through boot camp. I'm just absolutely amazed at the realism. Going through boot camp, I mean, it was the breathing, all the techniques that any soldier learns. And I was amazed in going and finding that, the military today, the young soldiers actually use Arma 3 to do training. And I saw a YouTube where they were simulating and training the tactics of extracting and insertions on both the Chinook and Black Hawk helicopters, and how realistic it is. And, I'm excited to get to go back in a gunship and, maybe get to pickle some rockets off, maybe fire the miniguns a little bit. And now that I'm out of boot camp, I'm going to be working on some rotary wing training. So when I go with you, I'll know what I'm doing.
Yeah, we'll have you flying in a few minutes. It's not hard. It's not too difficult to do it. And you could even go in your rivals, the 20th SOS.
Yeah, they're friendly rivals. When they were at Bamituit, and sometimes we would go to Bamituit and use that as an FOB. And when we were at Bamituit, the 20th SOS and the 195th had similar helicopter camo paint jobs. And so the crews would come down to the 195th helicopters in the morning, and they would notice a little subdued Green Hornet painted on the tail boom. And so they would sneak down to the flight line at night when nobody was there, and they'd paint Green Hornets on the tail boom. And, then of course, our crews would immediately, have to get out and rub them out and rub them off and get rid of them. But I think it's as Tilt Meyer said to me, he said that's quite a sign of, their respect for you, that, they were willing to, make sure that they were known. And so the Green Pilot, I have some very good friends that are Green Pilot crew members, and we have a lot of fun going back and forth and sharing that story with them.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think you originally got your camo paint job from the US Air Force, is that right, for your helicopter?
Yeah, and that was Colonel Drake and our commanding officer decided that they wanted us to have the camo paint job. And so the Air Force at Benoit painted them for them. And our commanding officer at the time made a deal. We'd give them an AK-47 that we got from Sigma, of course, and for every helicopter they painted. And so we were going to have them painted and all of the Army markings removed from the helicopters. And so they agreed to put the camo paint job on them. And of course, they also, Air Force, painted the camo paint job on the special operation units of the Air Force. So they used the same camo scheme. And the friend of mine passed away, but he went over there and he said they had basically a piece of paper with the, paint by numbers kind of a, deal on it with the colors. And so they painted our camo scheme very similar to what the Green Hornet was because of that similarity. You know, the Air Force did paint them.
Well, Don, I think we're coming to the end. We've kept you here for quite some time with this interview, and I want to thank you so much for the, for patiently answering all our detailed technical questions. We've been so fascinated to listen in. Sam, how's it been for you?
Oh, this is incredible. I've never gotten this kind of perspective before. And thank you so much for answering all those questions. I didn't want to go too far into it, but man, was that interesting. Thank you so much, sir.
Well, you're welcome. And I hope the interview will give you a little more perspective when you're playing the game now. You know, what those boys 50 some years ago did for real, that, you know, sparked it all and made it so exhilarating. And I think the SOG veterans are excited about Prairie Fire and its release. I've got quite a few friends whose grandkids are eagerly awaiting the release and, you know, can't wait for it. So let me know as soon as possible. And I'll be excited to, once I get my username on the
Steam.
To get acquainted with you and get in the real program.
Oh, I can't wait. I really can't wait, Don. So Don Hassey, crew chief, Ghost Rider, veteran hero. It's been a real honor to work with you, and thank you so much.
You are welcome.